Good morning. We are in Yerushalayim and picking up. We're on Memhei Amud Aleph. Okay, we're learning Ilay Nishmas Mendel Mariam Bas Kalman Reuven. Her neshama should have an aliyah. Okay, so we are in the middle of discussing Rav's opinion, whether he holds like Rav Shimon or he holds like Rav Yehuda. Again, Rav Shimon has he allows you to hold on to more things like the shin, and Rav Yehuda is much more contained. He only allows you to hold on to fewer things because Rav Shimon lisle muktzah, which literally means he doesn't hold of muktzah. He does hold of muktzah, but that's the term. The term means he doesn't hold of muktzah, meaning he has many things that Rav Yehuda holds are muktzah, Rav Shimon holds are not muktzah, and Rav Yehuda, once again, has a much more broad and expansive understanding of what is included in the laws of muktzah. So the Gemara just finished telling us that Rav holds like Rav Yehuda. Asked the Gemara, if Rav Rav Yehuda Svirle, is it true that Rav really holds like Rav Yehuda? But Baumine de Rav, it was asked of Rav, his students asked Rav, there's a group called the Chabarim. The Chabarim were these bad people who endangered, who would beat up, who would cause a lot of problems to the Jewish people for doing Jewish things. And the question the students asked, a very tragic question, was, are you allowed to hide the Hanukkah candle in front of these people? You're reading this Gemara like this, and actually just the other day, I got a question from a person who's going to University of Maryland, and a question about putting a mezuzah on the outside door. You're allowed to hide the mezuzah on the outside of your door because there's a fear of danger. So that's the same question. The same question was, you're putting up a Hanukkah candle, and these people are going to go ahead and you could get hurt. There's no problem to move it inside. So what's this all about? Now, again, we're talking about on Shabbos. So obviously at Hanukkah, when the light goes out, you're allowed to move the Hanukkah candles. We're talking about on Shabbos, when the lights go out, you're allowed to move it. So according to Rav Yehuda, since it got biz muksa when Shabbos began, you had to light the Hanukkah candles before Shabbos, and it was muksa during Bien HaShmashos, therefore it's going to be asur for all of Shabbos. Whereas according to Rav Shimon, he would hold it's allowed to be moved. And the fact that Rav answered it's allowed to be moved shows us that he seems like he holds like Rav Shimon, because Rav Shimon is the one who holds it's allowed to be moved. Now, you're going to come to the obvious answer when it says Shas Adchak Shani. We're talking about a Shas Adchak. This is a difficult time. This is not a normal ruling. There's a ruling that's based on the fact that they're endangered, and therefore you could rely on Rav Shimon. But in a normal scenario, you would not be allowed to rely on Rav Shimon. You'd have to go like Rabbi Yehuda. Now, the commentators point out, obviously, we're not talking about a case. These chabarim are not people who are literally going to really endanger the person, really hurt, really put the person in danger. Because if it's sakanas nefashos, if it's real danger, you're allowed to go against the deoraisa, and this is muksa. This is a durabanan. We're talking about a scenario where there's like a potential for danger, a potential for getting hurt. It's not full-fledged. We're not talking about a case where a person's life is truly in danger. Rather, it's just not an ideal situation where there's some level of danger, and that is the scenario we're talking about. And nonetheless, in this scenario, Rav goes like Rav Shimon and is more lenient and saying you're allowed to move the Hanukkah candles after it goes out. But normally he would hold like Rabbi Yehuda. Okay, and the Gemara brings a proof that he holds like Rabbi Yehuda. Daha Amri le Rav Kahan Bravashi Larav. Okay, Hachi Hilchasa. They said these two Amoraim, Rav Kahan and Ravashi, told Rav. They asked Rav, is this so? Is this halacha? It is worthy of relying on Rav Shimon in a situation of tchak. In other words, he says explicitly that the only reason he's relying on this is because this is a scenario which is less than ideal. Okay, Bamine, we have a question about Rav Shimon. Now we're going to discuss the parameters of Rav Shimon. How far-reaching or how lenient is Rav Shimon about muktzah, and are there scenarios where he is more stringent about muktzah? Now again, we saw earlier Rav Shimon, let's say the beehives and the honey that was dedicated for the bees. Nonetheless, Rav Shimon said since it's edible, it's not muksa. So how far does this go? In other words, when things are really theoretically designated for others, does Rav Shimon say, well, so what? As long as it's edible, then as long as there's a human use, then it's not muksa? Or are there certain scenarios where it's so designated for others, so designated for your non-use, that he's going to agree that it is muksa? So here's the question. Rish Lakish asks his chavrusa and brother-in-law, Rav Yochanan, let's say a person planted wheat into the ground, okay, but it's before it took root. Once it takes root, then it'd be uprooting. That would not be allowed. But we're talking about a person plants some wheat in the ground, hasn't yet taken root. Ubeitzim tachas ternagolos. So you have an egg under the hen. Okay, mahu. Is that muktzah? In other words, there, it's already in the ground, right? Or it's under the hen. That's like really not something which is so easily accessible. Obviously, you could reach it, but it's really seems like it's pushed away. Muktzah is like the idea is pushed away. It's really not going to, typically, if a person starts Shabbos and the egg is under the hen or the wheat is in the ground, it's pretty understood that the person is not going to be using it. So says the Gemara, when does Rav Shimon not hold of muktzah? When a person doesn't push it away with their hands. When a person, so to speak, pushes it away, isn't it muktzah? Maybe he holds a muktzah there, or maybe there's no difference. So Rav Yochanan answers, Amrle, ain muktzah Rav Shimon. There is no muktzah for Rav Shimon at all. Okay? The only time that Rav Shimon holds a muktzah is, as we saw earlier, when the oil that is in the candle that's still lit, that's what he holds a muktzah. But over here, even this egg, you'd be allowed to take. Even the wheat that's under the ground, you'd be allowed to take. Okay? Why is he strict about the oil that is in the candle while it's still lit? Hayal huktzah. Since it is since it is designated, it's set aside for its mitzvah, i.e. Shabbos candles, and hukta lisuru, and it is designated for iser. In other words, you're not allowed to extinguish a candle on Shabbos. So right now, the way that we're understanding Rav Yochanan's understanding of Rav Shimon, the way we're understanding Rav Yochanan's understanding of Rav Shimon is that according to Rav Shimon, what is muktzah? Something which is set aside for mitzvah and is set aside because there's a potential prohibition. Otherwise, even if it's dachya b'yadayim, even though you person bury the wheat under the ground, it's not muktzah. But now the Gemara is going to challenge this idea of, do you really need it to be huktzah l'mitzvaso and huktzah l'isura? Does it really have to be muktzah for a mitzvah, set aside for a mitzvah use that you wouldn't otherwise use it for personal use, and muktzah for an iser, or one or the other? So let's see. So the Gemara asks Rav Yochanan, huktzah mitzvaso, does Rav Shimon not hold of the concept of muktzah just for a mitzvah? Right? In other words, again, Rav Yochanan just said the reason that the oil is muktzah is because the fact that it's huktzah l'mitzvaso v'huktzah l'isura, because it's muktzah for the mitzvah of lighting candles, it's set aside for that, and it's muktzah because it's prohibited to mess around with this oil because it could get ruined. You could extinguish it, which would be forbidden. But yeah, we're about to see a scenario where Shimon's going to agree that something is going to be muktzah just because it's a mitzvah, not because it's an isser. What's the example? A very relevant example of Tanya. We have a brisa. Sicha kilchasa. A person covers their sukkah with schach, okay? And then the person uses these sheets, beautiful like blankets type of things. This is done in yarn and different types of embroidered, sheets which have pictures on it. Vitalbe goes in a farsikin shkedim rimonova farkale shalanavim batarshi bolin vienos shmanim sulasos. Okay, the person that goes ahead and puts all these different fruit and wheat and wine. Basically, the person hangs all these different adornments on the sukkah. Sukkah decoration is not a new thing. Sukkah decorations goes back. Always, we had this notion of decorating the sukkah. They would use fruit. They would use different fruits to hang up on the sukkah. But the bottom line is they decorate the sukkah, but it's set aside for the mitzvah of decorating the sukkah. Says the Brisa, asserly stopping mehen and matzah yom tov achron. A person is not allowed to benefit from them until the last day, until after Yom Tov. However, a person stipulated before and said, this bottle of wine which I'm hanging, or this pomegranate which I'm hanging from the schach, I want to benefit from on Yom Tov, then a person would be allowed. But absent that, it's huktzah le mitzvaso. It's not. So let's break this down. If it's so what we're saying over here is it's asser not only on Yom Tov, okay, but it's asr and chalamayit as well. You can't benefit from. It's interesting. You don't normally think of muktzah on days which are not sukkahs, but the truth is there is a form of muktzah. It doesn't mean you can't move it. Okay, this is important because there's a lot of confusion around this. When a decoration falls on chalamayit, you're allowed to move it. But you can't benefit from it. In other words, if let's say one of the decorations was a pomegranate, and pomegranate fell down on sukkahs on chalamayit, so this Bryce is telling us over here, asr listavik mehed, you're not allowed to benefit from it because it is muktzah. It's set aside for, and now there's no isser on chalamayit of eating these things, etc. What's the muktzah? The muktzah is mitzvah. It's set aside for a mitzvah. Again, it's said if you stipulate, then it's going to be okay, but otherwise, it's muktzah because I set it aside for a mitzvah. And the Gemara now, one could argue, wait, who said this brayso to Rav Shimon? We're going to bring another proof that it's actually that Rav Shimon has this opinion. Rav Shimon, how do you know that this brayso, which was anonymous, is Rav Shimon? Maybe it's Rav Yehuda. Then there'd be no question, because Rav Yehuda would hold, of course. Rav Yehuda has this more broad, expansive view of muktzah. So how do we know it's Rav Shimon? Tani, Rav Chia bar Yosef, Kamei, Rav Yochanan, Rav Chia bar Yosef, Tana in front of Rav Yochanan, a notlin eitzim in a sukkah b'yam tov. You're not allowed to take wood from a hut. Now, sukkah in this context, in the first line, means a hut. Okay? Elamina samachla, only from the wood that's next to it. So it seems like back in the day they have a sukkah, the structure, and then next to the sukkah they have like wood kind of around the walls. That wood is not really designated for the sukkah. You're allowed to take that from the hut on Yom Tov, okay? Rav Shimon says, no, you could take, if a sukkah, let me add, The Bryce is talking about even in a case where the hut falls down. So let's say you had a hut on Pesach. Okay, nice weather in Israel. It's actually pretty cold out here. But a person has a sukkah on Yom Tiv, and a person goes ahead and the sukkah falls down. So while it's built, I can't destroy it. That's so sir. Okay, but if it falls down, it's no longer part of the building. So Rabbi Yehuda would say, no, since it was muktzah when Yom Tov began, therefore it's going to be muktzah it's going to be muktzah throughout. Whereas Rosh Hashanah holds that principle doesn't apply, right? He's the one who holds that, like the candle, when the candle goes out, I'm allowed to use it. Similarly over here too, the structure falls down, I'm allowed to use it, right? So Rav Shimon Matir, right? Rav Shimon would allow. So far, so good, right? But this brisa, now we already see, this brisa is already discussing Rav Shimon, and the brisa then continues. Vishavin, they both agree, the Tanna Kama and Rav Shimon both agree, b'sukkah sachag b'chag, that the sukkah of the holiday, i.e., the sukkah, that what we call a sukkah, okay, shehi asura, that if something falls down, it's forbidden. Again, if a person made a stipulation, you could stipulate on the sukkah. But the bottom line is what you see. You see that Rav Shimon explicitly says that a structure that falls down on Sukkot. So let's say similarly, the schach falls down on Sukkot. You're not allowed to benefit from it because it's huktzah l'mitzvah. So there's no huktzah l'isuro. There's no isser over here. What isser is there in handling these things? It must be that Rav Shimon holds that when something is huktzah l'mitzvah, so when something is just designated for a mitzvah, even if there's no, again, by the Shabbos candles, there it's huktzah l'isuro. There it has also the prohibition, because if I take from the oil, I'm going to be extinguishing the candle over the flame. Over here, there's no isser. The only thing is it's designated for mitzvah, and nonetheless Rav Shimon says it's usher. So why did you, Rav Yochanan, tell us a moment ago that the reason Rav Shimon says you can't take from the oil from the candle is because it's huktzah mitzvah and huktzah l'isuro? It seems like huktzah mitzvah is enough. So Gemara says, okay, we misunderstood him. Gemara says like this. Really, what he meant to say is ke'ein shemen shebener, that Rav Shimon was saying it's like what is Rav Shimon aser? What does Rav Shimon say is prohibited for muktzah? Anything that is like the oil of the candle, that what? Kamrinan, hayal. So since something is designated for a mitzvah, it basically becomes muktzah for an isser. In other words, he's saying like this. He's saying that he didn't mean to say you need both. He didn't mean to say you need huktzah mitzvah and huktzah l'isuro, that it means to be muktzah set aside for a mitzvah and set aside for a prohibition. Rather, what he's saying is that any time it's set aside for a mitzvah, it's like it's set aside for a prohibition, and that would be sufficient. So basically, we're saying it like this now. Rav Shimon holds that something which is designated for a prohibition, in other words, there's a potential prohibition involved in handling the candle, I can't mess around with it, right? So for example, let's say I have a candle which is not part of my Shabbos candles. Rav Shimon would also say I can't use it while it's lit. But then he has a separate thing. If it's muktzah l'mitzvah, so if it's something which is set aside for a mitzvah, like schach, like sukkah decorations, you would not be allowed to use it on Yom Tov. Okay, so let's just pause here for a second for halacha l'maisa. So we see even Rav Shimon holds over here that there's this notion of muktzah l'mitzvah. So again, let's say you have decorations that fall off the sukkah. This happens all the time. So on Chol Hamoed, again, what it means muktzah in this context is you cannot go ahead and benefit from it. Okay, this is not so common in our modern times, but let's say again you have something which is you could potentially use for something else, and it falls off your sukkah, some decorations, I don't know, pomegranate, and you want to use it for pomegranate juice, palm juice. You're not allowed to do so. You're not allowed to do so because it was set aside for a mitzvah. You could put it back up. You could put it on the side. You can't use it during Sukkot. You have to wait until Sukkot is over. Let's say it falls on Yom Tov itself. Okay, here's a little more problematic because it's muktzah. So you'd be allowed to move it kila achar yad. What you need to do is you need to move it, with your elbow or something like that. Or let's say it falls on the table, it falls on the floor. You're allowed to move it with your foot. You're allowed to move it with your hands. If you need the place that it falls on, you'd be allowed to pick it up. Okay, that's on Yom Tov itself. So let's say again, your those lights, whatever, not lights, whatever, some decoration falls on your table, and you're bringing a meal over there. So on Sukkot itself, you can try to move with your elbow. Okay, doesn't work. You can move it with your hands. But if it's also Shabbos and Yom Tov, then you could only move it with your elbow. You would not be allowed to move it with your hands. Those are the laws of schach. Oh, not schach. Excuse me. Any adornments, any decorations that fall on Yom Tov. Again, 3 levels. On Chol Hamoed, you are allowed to move it. You're allowed to touch it. You cannot benefit from it because it's set aside for mitzvah. On Yom Tov itself, you're allowed to move. If you need the place that it's in, you're allowed to move it kila achar yad. You're allowed to move it with your elbow. You're allowed to move it with your foot. That's all fine. And if it's on Shabbos, then you could only move it with your elbow. If you need the place or leg, you cannot move it with your hands. Okay, let's go a little bit further about the parameters of Rav Shimon's muktzah. It's marnami. Amar Rav Chia bar Abba Rav Yochanan ein muktzah Rav Shimon ela ke'ein shemen shebener v'shashu dailek hal v'huktzah mitzvasa huktzah l'isar. Okay, so sorry. So we have first another statement where it's clear this notion where it says that for Rav Shimon muktzah is like oil in a candle while it's lit. Meaning, since anything which is set aside for the mitzvah, it's like it's set aside for a prohibition. Okay. Let's go further. Amr Rav Yehuda, Amr Shmuel. Ein muktav shemen ela grogros v'tzimukim bilvad. Says Rav Yehuda, in the name of Shmuel, that for Rav Shimon, he does hold a muktzah. When does he hold a muktzah? With things like a fig and grapes, which are set aside for drying. That's when he holds a muktzah. So what's this talking about? So back in the day, they would all have flat roofs, which you have over here in Yerushalayim. Looking around over here, everyone has flat roofs. And what they would do is they would take their fruit, they would take things they want to dry out, they put it on top of the roof, and it would dry out because it's really hot here normally. So Rav Shimon would hold, he says, that figs and grapes, they get dried out very quickly. It becomes basically unfit for use almost immediately. As soon as you put it out in the sun, it gets dry. It gets dry. And therefore, Rav Shimon over there would hold that since as soon as you put it up there, your thought process is like, I'm done with these two fruit. As soon as I put it up there, and therefore he would hold, I cannot go ahead. Let's say I did this before Shabbos, and now Shabbos begins, and I go, I want that grape. No, too bad, because there you really set it aside for something else. Meaning, whereas with the wheat you put in the ground, that's not enough because it's still edible. But something over here where it's really not going to be edible until it's fully dried out, there, if someone would agree that that is enough of a designation, enough of pushing away, that he would hold its muktzah. And where it asks, is it true it's only limited to figs and grapes? Other matters, no. V'atanu, we have a brisa. A person was eating figs and left them over. V'helan lagag lastos man grogros. And they were brought up to the roof, the leftovers, to make dried out figs, okay? These fine dried out fig stuff. A person's eating grapes and they have leftovers, and they're brought up to the roof to make raisins. Lo yochal achi yasmin. You can't eat them unless Erev Shabbos you designated, you said, I'm going to eat this on Shabbos. Otherwise, you can't do so, okay? And the same halacha is true for all different fruits, okay? All different fruits would be true as well. So you just told me it's limited to figs and grapes. We have a brisa over here saying it's true for all things. Anything you set aside up on the roof to dry out, you would not be allowed to eat it. Now, the Gemara says, Ilem Rav Yehuda money. Now, the Gemara, again, they have to ask this question every time we see a brisa. Who is it? Is it Rav Yehuda, who has the more limited amount of things you're allowed to hold? Is Rav Shimon, who allows you to touch much more, move much more? So, Imani, who's the author of this brisa? Ilema Rav Yehuda. If you want to say it's Rav Yehuda, in a scenario where a person does not push them away, like actively push them away, Islay Muktzah. Rav Yehuda holds a Muktzah. What he's referring to over here is the Gemara much later on. Rav Yehuda says you put fruit away in like a storage place, not to dry out, but a storage place. Rav Yehuda holds, it's still Muktzah, because again, Rav Yehuda is very, very limited in terms of what you're allowed to move. Over here, where a person put on the roof, for sure, it's forbidden. In other words, we're saying if the author of this brisa is Rav Yehuda, you wouldn't need it. You wouldn't need this brisa because we have another place where Rav Yehuda says explicitly that simply putting fruit in a storage cellar where it's still fully, it's not just as edible as it was a moment before. Rav Yehuda says it's muktzah. So for sure, in a scenario where I go ahead and put it on the roof, it's for sure going to be muktzah. El la Rav Shmidi. So if it's coming to teach me something novel, it can't be Rav Yehuda, because Rav Yehuda, we would know this for sure. It must be it's Rav Shimon. And what it's saying is that other fruit, not just figs and not just grapes, but other fruit as well. So it says no. And therefore, and the question then is on Rav Chia bar Abba, name Rav Yochanan, it's not limited, on Rav Yehuda Shmuel, it's not just figs and grapes, it's all fruit. So the Gemara says no. La'olam Rav Yehuda. Really, the author of this bride is Rav Yehuda. Ochel it's tzrichale. And if you were reading carefully, you would see there's a special chiddush over here, the fact the person is eating the fruit as he's putting it up. In other words, the person's munching on it, and they put it up while they're munching on it. Since the person's eating it, slowly by azmana. Therefore, a person doesn't need to designate it as saying, I'm going to eat it on Shabbos. It's clear you're going to eat it on Shabbos because I'm still eating it as they put it up there. It's like, I'm not really separating myself from it. I'm still involved in it. And therefore, even though I left it up there, I'm still, it would still not be muksa kamash malan. Kevan de hel lagag. The Gemara says, no, since the person put it up on the roof, asuche asche l'daita binayu, the person is indeed not thinking about it, and therefore it is forbidden. Have a wonderful day. I look forward to picking up tomorrow.